In today's video, we will build a multilingual marketing website from scratch for my magic business. The application will be built with Next.js and Tailwind CSS, and the data will be managed in Storyblok, which is a headless CMS. We will create the website in 3 phases. In the first phase, we'll create the website using hard-coded content. So we basically get the website structure done and the site looking as we want it to look. As I said, we will use Tailwind CSS for styling the website, but just as a disclaimer, we won't go into details of Tailwind CSS in this video, but we will rather just use it. In the second phase, we will create the necessary structure and content to our headless CMS, Storyblok, and then integrate our Next.js app to use the data from Storyblok instead of the hard-coded values. In the third and last phase, we will add translations to our application by configuring the Next.js app to handle different languages and then adding the actual translations to Storyblok. After this video, you will know my process and approach for a project like this, and you will also have created a fully functioning, ready to be deployed Next.js application that has support for multiple languages and uses dynamic content stored in a headless CMS. Without further ado, let's get started. First, let's create a fresh Next.js application. And we will use Tailwind, so let's select yes for that, and src directory and app router. And yeah, that's it. So let's let it run. And once it's run, let's open it up in VS Code. Okay, and let's fire up the dev server and see that the application is running. And let's open up the localhost 3000, and it looks like the application is running. Good. So now what we want to do next is actually clean this up a little bit and create the components for our website. So I'm going to start by opening up the src app and then the page file. And what I'm going to do is just remove everything from this return statement like this. And we can get rid of that image import too. And just for now, return a new div and say hello edit. Let's save it, check the browser. Good, everything is working. So what I'm going to do next is actually modify the CSS a little bit. So I'm going to open up the globals.css file. So what I'm going to do here is actually change the background color, because right now our background is completely black and we want it to be a bit more gray. And I already picked up a color for it, and how to change it is to just modify these values over here. So I'm going to paste in the new values like this. And now, since we don't have themes in our application currently, we can actually get rid of this media query over here because it's targeting the dark theme, and we just want to show the same colors for light and dark theme both. So I'm going to save the file. Let's switch to the browser, and we get this nice gray background over here. So that's good. So next up, let's start creating our components. So what I'm going to do now is just create a component for each section of the page. So in the app folder, I'm going to create a new folder called _components like this. And this underscore in the folder name indicates for Next.js that this is a private folder and it should not be considered when defining the routing of the application. So we can place our components inside of this folder and they won't be affecting the routing of the application. So I'm just going to start by adding components here. So let's start with the nav component like this. And I will add the boilerplate code for the component like this. So we are just exporting hello from navbar. Let's save it. And in our page file, I'm going to import that component like this. And then I will return it in the return statement. And I'm actually going to use React fragments. So I'm going to wrap each component inside of React fragments. So the shorthand for React fragments is this. And then we can just return the navbar over here like this. So let's save this, check the browser, and we have the navbar rendered. Great. So next I'm going to do the same thing for each of our sections. So we will have the hero section, services section, the testimonial section, contact section, FAQ section, and then the footer. So let me just add those and let's see how it looks after that. Okay, so what I now did was I actually created a component for each of our section. And you can see the components in the components folder, and each of these components is just the bare minimum of returning the hello from and then the component name. So each of these components does exactly the same thing at the moment. And what I did then was just import them inside of the page.js and then render them. So this gives us a good view of our site or application, and we can now start working on each of these sections inside of their components. So let's see this. I'm gonna save this and switch to the browser, and you can see all of the components now rendered in here. That's good. So let's start adding the code for these components. So let's start with the navbar. I'm gonna open up that component. And since we are now in this phase just defining the structure of the application and using the hard-coded content, I think I'm just gonna now insert the code for each of these components, and then we can go through each of the components code together just to see what's happening inside of it. Because all of this is just basic HTML and using Tailwind CSS classes. And as I said, we won't go very deeply on the Tailwind part. We're just gonna add those classes so you can get the nice look for your application. And if you want to follow along, you can of course pause the video, but I will also leave a link down below where you can find this code so you can also copy paste the structure of the code. Okay, so for the nav component, I'm gonna add the code for it, and let's go through it together. All right, so what we're doing here is just rendering the navbar as a div and then displaying this title section, which has my name on it, and it will be displayed on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, we have a couple of links that are for changing the language of the website, and then also a call to action link for booking me. So by clicking it, it will take you to the contact section where you can find the contact information for booking a gig. And looks like we are using the link component over here. So let's import that to up here like this. And let's save this and switch to the browser and see how it looks. Okay, looks good. So we have the title section over here and then the button and the language changing links. Good. So that's our navigation. Next, let's see the next section. So it's the hero section, which will have some text and an image in it. So I'm going to open up the hero component over here. And let me just input the code for here and let's go through it together again. All right. So I added the code for the return statement. So over here, we are wrapping everything inside of this container component. And this is a custom component that we want to add. So I'm gonna add an import for it and then let's create it like this. Then let's create a new file inside of the components folder, call it container. And let me input the code here and let's go through it together like this. So what we are essentially doing here is just rendering a div that has some special Tailwind CSS classes. So this is basically a component that we can use to wrap our content inside of. So each section that we use this in will have the same paddings and margins. So let's save this. We can close this now and switch back to the hero.js. So after the container, we are rendering a section with the heading over here, then a paragraph of text, this kind of introductory text, and then the booking button. And this all is on the left-hand side. Then on the right-hand side, we are just displaying an image, and this is using the next image, and we are passing in the image as a prop over here. So what we want to do now is actually import this image and then import this image component. And I think we need to still import the link component too. So let's do those now. So over here, I'm gonna add the link import, then the image import, and then the image. So what I'm gonna actually do is create a new folder inside of our public folder called EMG, and then paste in the image from my computer inside of that folder. So let me do that. Like this. So now I have the image inside of the public image folder. And again, I have a link in the description for the code of this application, so you can copy the image from there and use it if you want to follow along. But now that we have our image, only thing left to do is import it. So let's do that like this. And let's save this now and check the browser how it looks. All right, looks like we have everything for our hero section over here. So we have the image over here, and then the title, some text, and then the button. Okay, that's great. So next, let's move on to the services section. So I'm gonna close this and open up the services component. And again, I'm just gonna paste in the code for this, and let's go through it together then. Okay, so this component has a little bit more going on than the previous two. So first of all, here is the services component, and inside of it, we will render the title, and then we will render the different services as these kind of service cards. And the service card is also a custom component, which is defined just down here. So what it does, it gets data as a prop, which has the title, subtitle, price, and description. And then we will return a div that renders all of those properties. And the data for this is actually stored inside of this services array right here. So it's just the JavaScript array with a couple of objects with title, subtitle, description, and price. So what we do is we map through this array over here and then return a service card for each of these objects. Okay, so let's save this, switch to the browser, and let's see how it looks. So we have the title over there, then we have the different cards. So each of these is a service card component, and all of those render the title, the subtitle, which in this case is just the duration for the show, and then a description and the price down here. Okay, so our services section looks pretty good. So next, let's jump into the testimonials section. So I'm gonna close the services, open up the testimonials, and again, I will insert the code and let's go through it together then. Okay, so this is kind of the same as the services section, but again, a little bit more complicated. But what we do here is, again, we have an array of the data. So all the testimonials are stored in this JavaScript array, with each of the testimonial having one object with name, image, and comment. Then we have the actual testimonials component, and what that does is it renders a heading or header, and then loops through the testimonials and returns a testimonial card for each of these objects in the array up here. And the testimonial card is also a custom component down here. So it gets the data as a prop and uses the image, name, and comment. So first it renders the comment in a paragraph and then uses this avatar component to display the image and name. And this avatar component is also a custom component which is defined down here. So what it does is uses the next image to display the image and then renders the name down here. So what we are still missing is a couple of imports. So we want to import the image and then also the user image up here. So for the demo purposes, I'm just using the same user image for each of these testimonials. So let's import those. So I'm gonna import them up here. So first the next image and then the actual user image. And for this, again, I'm just gonna copy paste the image to our public and EMG folder from my computer. And you can find the same image from the link in the description if you want to follow along. So I'm gonna copy that image up here like this. So it's just this generic image for the profile pic. And then let's import it in here like this. I'm gonna save this. It looks like it's actually giving me a warning about the key prop, so let's add that. I think it's coming from here, so we are rendering these testimonial cards. So let's give a key for each of these. And I'm gonna pass in the name as a key like this. So let's save it. We get rid of the warning and let's see the browser. And scroll down a little bit. So our services section is there. And there is our testimonial section. So it's rendering the title and then for each testimonial, the testimonial card with the comment and then the name and the image. Okay, looking good. Next, we have the contact section. So let's do that. I'm gonna close the testimonials, open up the contact section. And again, I'm gonna input the code and let's go through it together. All right, so here we are again using the container component and then rendering a paragraph of text encouraging people to contact or book a gig. and then our contact information down here. So we have the email, phone number, and location. And you can see we are using these email, phone, and location icons. So they are something we are defining down here. So they are just SVGs that we want to render. So the email icon, phone icon, and location icon are all down here. All right, so let's save this and switch to the browser and see how it looks. Looks good. So we get the title, the description text, then email, phone number, and the location. And all of these have the icon too. That's great. Next, the FAQ section. So let's close this, open up the FAQ, and again, I will input the code and let's go through it together then. Okay, so this is kind of the same as the services or testimonials components were. So we have the data up here, so the questions and answers. Then inside of the FAQ component, we map through that data, and for each of the question up here, we render a FAQ card, and it is a custom component that is defined down here. So FAQ card gets the data as a prop and then uses the question and answer to render them as a heading and then a paragraph of text. So let's save this, see how it looks. Okay, looks good. So we have a FAQ card for each of our questions with the question as a title and then the answer as a paragraph of text. Okay, good. So only thing left to do for us is the footer. So let's switch to the VS Code and close this and open up the footer. And I will again add the code for it and let's go through it together then. All right, so this is pretty simple. We are just returning a div with the copyright text in it. So let's save it and check the browser, and there is our footer. All right, so now we have the structure of our website ready. So we have the nav bar up here, then we have the hero section, then the services section, then the testimonial section, then the get in touch or the contact section, FAQ section, and our footer. And all of this is now using the hard-coded values, the hard-coded data. So next, what we want to do is actually put all this data that is displayed in here to a headless CMS and then integrate our application with that headless CMS to display that data from there. So what this enables us to do is actually modify just the data inside of the headless CMS instead of us having to go through the code, change the code there, then commit the changes, push the changes, deploy the changes. So it is much easier to maintain the website and the data of it when it's not hard-coded. So we did hard-code it right now just to get the structure and for the purposes of this tutorial. So it's easier to now start integrating the application with the headless CMS. Okay, let's do that next. So the headless CMS we are going to use is Storyblok, and they were also kind enough to sponsor this week's video. So what I'm going to do next is actually log in, and if you don't already have an account, you can create one for free by clicking up here, try for free. So this is free to use as a developer. So if you check the pricing, there is some paid plans if you need more users or more powerful features. But if you are just creating, for example, this application, you can use the community plan, which is free for developers, freelancers, and small businesses. Okay, so create an account if you haven't already, and I'm gonna log in now, so let's see you inside. All right, so now we are logged in, and where we want to go next is go My Spaces. So what space is inside of Storyblok? It is kind of a content repository. So you can think of it as a place to keep all your content related to one project. So for this website, we want to create a new space. So let's click up here, add space, and we want to create new space, give it a name like this, and then you can select the server location, EU or US. And then let's click create space. And when you create your space, you actually get 14-day free trial for all the paid features like scheduling, releases, data sources, asset folders, and more. But again, after the 14 days, you can still continue using the free community plan if you want, or you can upgrade to a paid plan if you need it. But for us, we will just continue with the trial. So next, what we want to do inside of our space is actually create something called blocks and then also something called stories. So the blocks can be found from the block library over here. And we can already see there is automatically a couple of these over here, but I'm just gonna click all of them and delete because we want to start fresh. So blocks inside of Storyblok are these small piece of data structure, which can be filled with content or nested inside of other blocks. And there are three types of blocks inside of Storyblok. So let's start by creating a new block. So I'm gonna click over here, and right here we can see if we want to have nested block, content type block, or universal block. So nested blocks live inside of stories or other blocks. So with content type blocks, we can create templates for our stories. So for example, landing page could be a content type block. And then we have universal blocks that can be either content type block or a nested block. So with these blocks, we can define the structure of our data inside of our application. And then I mentioned also the stories. So let's open up the content section. And here we can create something called stories. And a story inside of Storyblok is a content entry. And each story is defined exactly with one content type. And that content type describes the fields that are available for that story. So for example, if we have a content type block for the landing page, we can create a story that will have the structure of that landing page. So all the fields that the landing page has. Okay, so now what we want to do next is actually create a new block. So we will create a new content type block for our landing page. So I'm gonna select the content type block and give it a name, add block, and now the block is created. So next we can define the fields that we want to have for that block. So the field types can be different blocks, texts, number, single options, table, so on. So you can see all the options down here. And for our landing page block, what we want to do is define a section or a field for each of our sections inside of our code. So for each of these sections, we want to define a field inside of our landing page block. So let's start with the nav bar. So I'm gonna name this nav section like this. And for the field type, I'm gonna select blocks. So this means that I can insert other blocks inside of this section. I'm gonna click add, and then I'm gonna create this same kind of section for each of our other section. So hero, services, testimonials, contact, FAQ, and footer. So let me just do that like this. So now we have a field that is type of blocks for each of our section. So nav, hero, services, testimonials, contact, FAQ, and footer. So now let's save this and close this up here. So now we have the landing page structure defined in here. So the landing page is type of content type. And next we want to define a block that is type of nested block for each of our sections. And inside of that block, we will have all the fields relevant for that section. So I'm gonna click new block, give it a name, and let's start with the navigation. So from top to bottom. So I'm gonna give it a name like this. And now I want to select the nestable block. Click add block. And now the fields for that block. So if we look at our website, what we have here is actually we have the heading over here. So right now it's just my name. And then we have the links that change the language. And we have the button which has some text in it. So when I'm looking at this, I think these language links are something that I want to keep in the code. So they are something that I don't need to modify really often. But the text of this button and the title up here are something that I might want to change, and also something I might want to translate later on. So what I'm going to do is add a field for the title and then this button text. So let's switch back to the Storyblok page, and for the fields, first let's add the title, and now it's type of text. Let's click add. Then we want to add a text field for that button text too. And I'm going to call it CTA button text. So call the action button text, and it's type of text. Click add. And now we have two fields in our navigation block. So let's click save. So now we have defined the navigation block and the landing page content type block. So let's see the content section and actually create the story for our landing page. So I'm gonna click create new and story and then give it a name. Let's call it landing page and then choose the content type. And for this, I want to now select the landing page content type. So this comes from the landing page content type block. Let's click create. Okay, so now it opens up this view over here. And Storyblok has something called visual editor, which enables the editors to edit their content with a context preview. So basically we can get a preview over here of our web page. This is something that we won't cover in this video, but it's a very cool feature when I tested it out and definitely something that I might do a video about in the future. But for this video, we won't use that, so we can close it up here. So now we can see all the sections that we defined in our landing page block. So you can see nav section, hero section, and so on. So now let's add some content to our navigation. So I'm gonna click the add block up here, and now it will show all the blocks that I can insert here down here. So right now we only have the navigation, so it only displays that, but let's select it. So now it shows it over here, and we can click it open like this. So now we have the title and CTA button text fields down here. So these are coming from the navigation block. So now we can add content for this. So I'm gonna add the title over here and then the CTA button text. And I'm gonna insert book a show like this. And then we can click save up here. And what now happens is it saved this content as a draft. So it is not yet published. And how we can see the content of this story is from up here. If we click the arrow, we can see the draft JSON or the published JSON. So if we open up the draft JSON, so we now saved this information as draft by just clicking the save button. So let's click the draft JSON. And here we can see all the data for our story. And what interests us at this point is this content section over here. So here we have all the data for our different sections. So we can see FAQ, nav, hero, so on. And all the other sections right now are empty because we haven't inserted any data or blocks for them yet. But the nav section has some data because we just saved it. So it has the title, which we inputted, and then the CTA button text like this. And these are something we are interested right now about. So this is the draft JSON. But what if we check the published JSON up here? You can see it returns this record could not be found. And that's because we haven't published this story yet. So now if we click the publish and now check the published JSON again, we can see that there is the same data as we had with the draft JSON. So we have the nav section up here, and then the title and CTA button text. And you can also see that there's a little bit less information. For example, for this nav section, we don't have this editable property. And this is something that I think is used with the visual editor. So since it's published data, it's something we don't need. But that's important to understand the difference between the draft data and the published data. So now that we have our story and we have some data in it, we can take this story and use it as a data source for our website. So we can configure the Next.js application to, instead of using the hard-coded values, to use the data from Storyblok. So let's see how to do that. So I'm gonna switch back to the VS Code, and inside of our page.js, I'm gonna define a new function called getLandingPageData. And this function will fetch the data from Storyblok and then return that data. So all of our components down here can use it and display the data from Storyblok. So how we are going to get that data is through their REST API. They also have a client for React and JavaScript, but I think for this example, I'm just gonna use the REST API directly with fetch. So we can also take advantage of the Next.js fetch caching. And just to illustrate how easy it is to use the data from Storyblok, that you don't necessarily need any other tools than just a way to make a simple REST request. So let's make the request. So first I'm gonna define a URL, which will be a string where we want to make that request to. And then I will define a request variable and we will make a fetch request to that URL like this. And for now, I'm gonna add another parameter over here saying cache no store like this. And what this tells Next.js is that we don't want to cast this fetch request. So whenever we call this fetch request, we always want to get the fresh data. So now what should we put in this URL? Well, we can go back to Storyblok and just over here, click the draft JSON. We can see the data over here and copy this link over here. So this is the API endpoint with the correct parameters that we want to use. And I'm going to use the draft endpoint instead of the published JSON endpoint, just so that whenever we add data over here, we don't always have to publish it. We can just save it and get it inside of our application. Okay, so I'm going to copy this URL and switch back to the VS Code and paste it in over here like this. And let's check the URL a little closer. So we can see that as a version, we are passing in draft. So we could pass in published. So we could get the published version. Then we have a token that authenticates us to the API. And then we have this CV, which is the cache version number. And I'm actually going to get rid of this. And what I want to do here is I'm going to actually add this version and token as variables over here, like this. So I'm just defining them over here and then adding them into the URL like this. And one other thing I actually want to do right away for these is to add them to the environment variables, so we don't have the token lying around inside of our code. So to do that, I'm gonna create a new file to the root of the project called .env.local, like this, and then define those variables in here. And I think I'm gonna call this version as SB data version, so Storyblok data version, and that will be draft, and then SB token is the token value. So I'm gonna copy it from here like this, and I'm gonna save this. Then in the page.js, I'm gonna get these values from the environment variables like this. So we can get them from the process.env. the variable name. So now our token and version is stored in the environment variables instead of in our code. And then we are getting them over here and putting them in the request. Okay, good. So next, what I want to do is get the actual story data. So let's do that. So this variable now holds all the JSON we see over here. So what we want from here is the story, then the content, and then each of these sections. And for the first one, we want the nav section. So let's do that. So I'm gonna define a variable called nav section, and I will extract it from the story data dot story dot content like this. So story data, story content. So story data, which is the whole JSON, then story, then content, and from there the nav section. And noteworthy here is that it's an array of objects. So what we actually want to return for our component is just this object. So now that we have the nav section, so this is the array, and let's return from this function an object. And what I'm going to do is return an object with property for each of those sections. So first off is the nav section. So I'm going to define a nav section. And now I want to use that first element of this nav section array for that nav section property in here. Sorry if this sounds complicated, but you will see in a minute how it works. So for this, we want to have the nav section, and it was an array, and we want the first element of it, so we can do it like this. So now let's save this, and our function should be now ready to fetch the navigation data. So just to recap, we are making a fetch request to the URL of the Storyblok API, and then we are getting the story data and extracting the nav section from it, and then just returning from this function an object with property nav section, and this nav section will hold the data equal to this over here. All right, so now what we can do in our page component over here is just to call this function. So let's do that, and we need to add async over here because we are awaiting inside of here. And right now you might be wondering that we can't do this because we have the token in here, so it's basically a secret, so we don't want to have the browser or the client access to that token. But right now we are using the app directory for the Next.js, and all the components inside of the app directory are by default server components if you don't define otherwise. So what this means is that this component is actually run on the server, and this function over here is also run on the server. So there is no risk of passing this token, for example, to the client. So we can call this function over here and then pass in the data for our components. And right now, all of our components too are server components because we haven't defined them as client components. So this makes fetching the data pretty cool, and we can do it already in the server instead of returning the JavaScript to the browser and then making the request to some API. So now we have the story data in here, and what we want to do is to use the navigation section data inside the nav bar. And to do this, I'm just gonna pass in the nav section as data prop like this. So we're passing it as a data prop. Let's save this. And now we still need to modify the nav section to use that data. So I'm gonna open up the nav bar and we get the data as a prop over here. And then I want to get the title and the button text from that data. So if we double check the JSON over here, they are the title property and the CTA button text. So let's add those like this, and then we can render those instead of these hard-coded values. So I'm gonna replace that title with the title like this, and then the button text with the CTA button text variable like this. So now if we save this and switch to the browser and open up our application, we can see we have the title and the button text over there. And if we open up our Storyblok, we can validate that it's fetching the data from here. So now if we want to modify, for example, this title, let's add a couple of exclamation marks like this, and maybe a couple of more for that. And now if we save the data in Storyblok and switch back to our application and refresh the page, it will display the modifications in our nav bar. So it is fetching the data from Storyblok. What I'm going to do is just take those away. So let's use it as it was, save it. Now refresh the page, they are gone and it looks good. So now we have the nav component ready. It's using the data from Storyblok. So let's continue with the other component. So next, let's tackle the hero section. So I'm going to open up Storyblok. I have the story open here. And now for the hero section, if I click the add block, we don't yet have a block for this hero section. So that's something we want to do now. So I'm going to close this over here, and then I can actually open up the block library in this view from up here. So let's click that. And now I'm going to create a new block and call it hero, and it's nestable block. Let's add it. And now let's add the fields for it. So if we check the application, it has the title, the description text, the button text, and the image. So let's add those to our hero block. So first the title and its text. Then we have the description, and this is a longer form of text. So I'm gonna select the text area for it and click add. Then let's add the button text. So CTA button text and its type of text. Let's click add. And then the picture, and it is type of asset. And let's click add. And let's actually click the picture open one more time. So down here we can define what file types should be accepted for that, because asset can be images, videos, audio, text documents, but we want to only accept images for this. So I'm gonna click the images and save and back to fields. So now we have the fields for our hero section. So let's save it and we can close the block library. And again, we are inside of our landing page story. So if you closed this earlier, you can find it from the content tab and then the landing page. So now let's click the hero section and add block and select the hero block from there. And now if we expand this, we can again input the data for this. So let me just input the values over here right now like this. So we have the title, description, the button text, and then for the asset, I'm gonna click add asset. And what I want to do is actually upload the image that we already used to this asset library. So I can drag and drop it over here or click upload from your computer. So I'm gonna select it. It was the TK cards JPEG, and I'm actually gonna upload the profile pic already because we will need it later on. So these are the same files that we had in VS Code in the public and IMG folder. So I'll select those and upload them. Okay, good, they are over there. And now I want to select the TK cards image for the hero like this. So it shows it over there. So now we have the data for our hero section inputted. So I'm gonna click save. And let's see the draft JSON again. So I'm gonna go there and refresh the page. And now we can see we get some information for the hero section also. So let's do the same thing for the hero section that we did for the navigation section. So I'm gonna open up VS Code and I will open up the page.js and let's modify the get landing page data to also return the hero section data. And all we have to do here now is to add that hero section over here. So we want to extract that from the JSON and then return it like this. And again, the hero section is also an array, as you can see over here. So what we want is just to return the first element of that array. So we do it like this. So we can save this and go a little bit down. And then for the hero section, we can pass in that hero section data, same way we did for the navbar, like this. Let's save it and then open up the hero section component. So over here, we still need to define that. Let's use the data that we get instead of the hard-coded values. So let's add the data prop over here and then extract the desired values in here from the data like this. So we are getting the title, description, the button text, and the picture. And then we modify the component to actually use these values instead of the hard-coded values. So for the header, we want to use the title. Then for the paragraph of text, we want to use the description. And then for the button text, we want to use the CTA button text. And then for the image, we want to use the picture. And this picture, if we check the JSON over here, we can see actually that it's an object with lots of properties. And the property that we want is actually this file name. So we get the link for the image so we can display it. So we want to pass in as src the picture.file name. Let's save this and switch to the browser. And looks like we get an error saying that we have an invalid src prop. And for the next image, we should have the hostname configured in the next config.js. So this is a property of next image. So if we want to show images from other domains or URLs, we need to define the allowed domains in the next config.js. So let's do that. So I'm going to open up the Next.js config file over here and let me paste in the definition over here like this. So in order to define the allowed host names, we want to pass in an image object, then the array of remote patterns, and then over here define the allowed host names. So we have a protocol HTTPS and the host name was a.storyblok.com. As we can see over here, it tried to add the image from a.storyblok.com. So we don't have to put the whole URL, just the domain part of it over there like this. So let's save this, and looks like Next.js automatically reboots the server, but if it didn't, please do reboot your dev server, because whenever you make changes to the next config.js, you need to reboot the dev server. Okay, so let's close this, switch back to the browser and refresh the page and see if the error goes away. All right, looking good. So now we have the image over there and we have the texts over there. And now again, we can test this. So for example, if we take the last name out of the title and add some exclamation marks over there and click save, we should see the changes in our application when we refresh the page. So let's do that. And looks like we get them. So exclamation marks over there and the title was changed too. So I'm gonna change them back and click save like this. And now they should come back when we refresh the page. Good. Okay, now we have the hero section. Next, let's go to the Storyblok and add the services section. So again, I'm going to open up the block library, create a new block for the services, give it a name, services, it's a nested block, and click add block, and then input the fields for this. So if we check the application, we have this title over here. So let's add that, and it's a text. Okay. Then we have these service cards. So each of these has some information in it. So price, description, subtitle, and title. So what we want to do next is actually add that this services section has a field called service cards. And this will be a type of blocks. and let's click add and let's save this. And now let's create a new block called service card like this. And it also is a nested block. Let's click add block. And now for this, we want to add all the fields from our service cards in here. So title, subtitle, description, and price. So let's add those. So title, it's a text, subtitle, it's a text, then description, and the price. And all of these are type of text. So now let's click save. And now we should have all our blocks ready. So I can close the block library and then go to the landing page story. And for the services section, I'm going to click add block and then choose the services over here. And now if I click it open, it shows me the title field. So I can input that. Let's do it like so. And now for the service cards, I can add one or multiple other blocks. So let's click add block. And now I want to choose the service card over here. And inside of here, we can expand that and we can see all the fields over here, title, subtitle, description, and price. So let's add the values of the first card inside of here like this. And I'm gonna click save over here and make it a little bit smaller. So now we have saved this. Let's check the draft.json again. So I'm gonna open it up and refresh the page. And now if I scroll down a little bit, I should see in the services section, we have over here, we have the title, and then we have the service cards. And for now, we only have the one that we defined over here. So looks like everything is good on this front. So at this point, let's add the modifications to the application to actually show this data. And after that, we can add the rest of the cards. So I'm gonna switch back to the VS Code and let's open up the page.js. And over here, again, I just want to extract the services section the same way we did the nav and hero, and then return it from this function like this. Then if we scroll down a little bit, we want to pass in that data for the services section component. So let's do that like this. So let's save this and open up the services component because we still need to modify this component to use that data. So over here, I want to add that data prop in the component. And now so far we used this array over here as a data source. So now that we are fetching the data from a Storyblok, I can delete this array like this and then get that array of the service cards from that data. So let's do that like this. And I also extracted the title property because this component is rendering the services section title. So now let's display these values instead of the hard-coded ones. So I'm gonna replace this services text over here with the title, and then the services.map I'm gonna replace with the service cards like this, and that should be it. So let's save it and switch to the browser and scroll down a little bit. We can see our services section now, and the card is displaying the correct information, but there is only one, and that is because we only defined one inside of our data so far. So now let me add all of the rest of the cards like we did the first one over here, and let's see if the application displays them after that. All right, so now we have defined a service card block for each of those services that we want to display. So now I'm gonna click save and let's see the application. So as we saw, we only had the first one there, but now if we refresh the page, it displays the other ones too because we added them to Storyblok. Okay, great. Now, next we have the testimonial section. So again, same thing. Let's open up Storyblok and we have the testimonial section. But before we can add anything to it, let's add the testimonials block. So I'm going to open up the block library and then create a new block for the testimonials. So let's give it a name and it's a nestable block. Let's click add block. And if we check the application again, it has the section title and then the testimonial cards down here. So we have to do the same thing as we did for the services section. So first let's define the title field like this, and it's a text. And then we want to define the testimonial cards. And now it's also type of blocks. Let's save it. And now let's create that testimonial card block. So I'm going to click new block, give it a name, and it's type of nestable block. Let's add that block. And now let's add the fields for it. So we had the name of the person giving the testimonial, and it's a text, then the actual comment, and that's a text too, and then also the user image, like this. And that is the type of asset, as it was with the hero image. And let's click add, and let's open up the image again, and just check that we want to only accept images for this. All right, so let's click save and back to fields. So now we have our testimonial card block and the testimonials section block. So now we can close our block library and again open the landing page, story, and then in the testimonials section, let's click add block, and we want to add the testimonials block for it. Let's expand it, and now it shows the title, but looks like it doesn't show the testimonial cards. So did I not save it earlier? So let's see. Let's open the block library and the testimonials, and yeah, looks like I didn't click the save. So let's add the testimonial cards again. So let's give it a name, and it was type of blocks. Click add and click save, like this. Okay, now let's close the block library and open up the testimonial section again. And now we have the testimonial cards here also. So now let's input the title, and that was what people are saying. And then let's add the testimonial cards. So I'm gonna click add block and choose the testimonial card, expand it. Now we can see all the fields here again. So let's input the data for this, like this. And again, let's add the image by clicking it. And now we want to add the profile pic image that we already uploaded in the earlier stage. So let's click that. So now that will be added for that testimonial card. All right, so let me just add the other testimonial cards over here, the same way we did add this one. All right, so now I have a card block for each of the testimonial in here. Let's save it and check the draft JSON again. So now we are looking for the testimonial section over here. It looks like it's there. It has the title and then the testimonial cards as an array over here. Okay, good. Now let's modify the application to use that data from Storyblok instead of the hard-coded values. So I'm going to open up VS Code and let's open the page.js. And again, as previously, let's add the testimonial section over here. And then we want to return that also. And as the other ones, it's also an array, and we just want to return the first element of it. So now this function is returning the testimonial section too. So we can do in the actual page component, just pass in that data for the testimonials component, like this. So now let's save this and open up the testimonials component. And inside of here, we were getting the testimonials from this array. So now, since we are getting the data from Storyblok, we can remove this one from here, like this. And then let's add the data prop for that component and extract the fields from that data prop like this. So we want to use the title and the testimonials card. And now let's modify the component to actually display these. So I'm gonna replace the text in the header with the title like this. And then instead of the testimonials, we want to map through the testimonial cards. And then I think we need to also modify the testimonial card because it uses the image. And if you remember, the image is coming as an object like this, and we want to use the file name property of that. So when passing in the image for the avatar component, let's just pass in the image.file name like this. So it gives the URL for the component. All right, let's save this and switch to the browser. And it looks like we were using the placeholder blur for the image. So let's for this just remove that. So over there, let's remove it and save it. And now it should work. So let's refresh the page. And if we scroll down a little bit, we can see the testimonials down here. So looks like it's working. It's fetching them from Storyblok. So now our testimonial section is ready. Let's do the contact section next. So again, let's add Storyblok. I have the landing page story open. And before we add any blocks to the contact section, we need to create the block. So I'm opening the block library and creating a new block. Let's give it a name, and it's nestable block. Click add block, and now let's add the fields for it. And the fields are, if we check the application, we have the title, then we have the text, then email, phone number, and country. So let's add those. So first the title, then the description, and let's make this as a text area because it might be a longer description. Then we had the email and phone number and location, like this. So all of these are text fields except the description field, which is text area. Now let's click save, and we can close the block library, and we have the landing page story open. So for the contact section, let's click the add block and choose the contact block over here and expand it. And now we can see the fields over here again. And now let's input the data for these like this, and let's click save and check the draft JSON. And we are looking for the contact section over here. Looks like everything is there. So now we can configure the application to use the contact data from Storyblok. So let's open up VS Code, and I'm going to open the page.js and add the contact section here as we have done for the other sections too, and then return that contact section down here too, like this. And then scroll down a little bit and pass in that data for the contact section component, like this. Let's save it and open up the contact component over here. And here, let's add the data prop and then extract the fields from that data variable like this. So we are getting the title, description, email, phone, and location. And then we can modify the component to display these instead of the hard-coded values. So let's replace this text over here with the title. Then we want to replace this text with the description. Then here we want to display the email, and over here the phone, and lastly the location, like this. Let's save this, switch to the browser, and we get an error, but looks like this is something that will go away by refreshing the page. So when we are adding the new data to the components, it might be that you have to refresh the page to get it working correctly. So let's refresh the page, and looks like it's working. And if we scroll down to the contact section, looks like it's showing the correct data over there. Good. So next, let's tackle the FAQ section. So open up Storyblok, and I have the landing page story open. And again, we need to create the FAQ block for it. So let's open up the block library, and let's create a new block, give it a name, and it's a nestable block. Let's click add block, and now let's add the fields for it. And if we check the application, again, we have the title of the section, then we have the FAQ cards, which all have a question and an answer. So let's add the title field and the FAQ cards field. So first is the title, it's a text, and then the FAQ cards field, which will be type of blocks. And click add, and now let's click save. And now we still need to create a block for that FAQ card. So let's click new block, give it a name like this. It's a nestable block. Let's click add block. And now for this, the fields were just the question and the answer. So let's add those. And the both are type of text. Great. Let's click save. And now we have our FAQ blocks, so we can close the block library. And in the landing page story, let's click the add block from the FAQ section, and we want to add the FAQ block for it. Let's expand it, and now input the title for it. And then for the FAQ cards, let's click the add block, and we want to select the FAQ card. And now we can expand that, and now we can add the question and the answer over here. So let me do that. Like this, and this is just the first card, so let me just add rest of these cards also over here. All right, so now I have all the questions and answers defined over here, so I can click save, and let's check the draft JSON to see if they appear over there. So we are looking for the FAQ section, and looks like all the questions and answers are there, as well as the title. So now we can move to the VS Code and use the FAQ data from Storyblok instead of the hard-coded value. So again, I'm gonna modify the get landing page data function and add the FAQ section over here like this, and then also return it down here. And then scroll down a little bit and pass in that data for the FAQ section component like this. So let's save this and open the FAQ component. And over here, we were using the FAQs array as a data source, so we can now get rid of that. and instead use the Storyblok data. So I'm going to add the data prop and then get all the fields from that data variable like this. So we are using the title and the FAQ cards. So let's modify the component to use these. So first I'm gonna replace this text over here with the title. So we want to render the title over there. And then instead of mapping through the FAQs array, we want to map through the FAQ cards array like this. And now let's save this and switch to the browser. It looks like we get the same error as last time. So let's just refresh the page. It looks like it's not going away with refresh. So there might be something wrong with our variables. Okay, so it looks like we named our FAQ cards with FAQ cards, so without the S. So let me just go to the Storyblok and click the edit field icon for the FAQ card field. And over here we have the field name. So I'm just gonna click change and name it as FAQ cards like this. And let's save it and save, and we can close this. So now if we check the JSON again, we can see that it updated the field name to FAQ cards. So now our application should work also. So if we refresh the page, looks like it's working. So let's scroll down and we can see we have the FAQs down here correctly. Okay, great. So the only thing left to do is the footer. So let's do that next. So I'm going to open up Storyblok and I have the landing page story open, and let's add the footer block. So let's open the block library and create new block and name it as footer, and it's a nestable block. Let's add it. And for the field, I think we only need one field called text, because right now we only have the one text over there. So let's add that text and its type of text. Let's click add and save like this. So now let's close the block library, and now let's click the add block for the footer section, select the footer, and we can expand it and now give the text for it like this. Let's click save and check the draft JSON again, and let's see the footer section, and looks like the text is over there. Good. So now let's add this to the application too. So I'm going to open up VS Code and the page.js, and let's add the footer section over here as we have done for the other sections too, like this. And then let's return that to like this, and then pass it for the footer component like this. Now let's save it and open up the footer component, and let's add the data prop over here, and then let's get the text field from that data like this. And now instead of displaying this text over here, let's display the text variable like this. So now let's save the page and switch back to the browser, and let's refresh the page and scroll down, and we should see the correct footer over there. Okay, good. So now our website is actually using all of its data inside of Storyblok. And if we want to add something or remove something, we can just do it in the Storyblok. For example, if we want to add a new testimonial, we can just add it over here and it will be displayed on the website. And as I mentioned earlier, we are using the fetch request to get the data from Storyblok, and we use this noStore cache for our request. And now that I look at it, it looks like I have typoed this, so it should be noStore cache. So instead of using the cache noStore, what we actually want to do is add this other prop for here. So we want to add next and pass for it revalidate and give it a value. For example, in this case, let's give it 10 seconds. So what this means is that if I now open this page for the first time, it will make the fetch request to the Storyblok API. But for the next 10 seconds, no matter how many times I refresh the page, it will always serve the cached version of that request. And after 10 seconds, it will then make a new request whenever someone opens up the web page. And then it will use that data for the next 10 seconds too. So let's test this out actually. So I'm gonna save this and let's open the browser, and let's say we want to modify, for example, the title of the navigation. So I'm gonna add some exclamation marks over here. So now if I refresh the page in our application, it will make the fetch request to the Storyblok API, but for the next 10 seconds, it won't. So let's refresh the page. So it makes the request, then I will quickly update the data. And for the next 10 seconds, when we refresh the page, it won't show the updated data yet, but after 10 seconds, it will display it. So let's test it out. So now let's refresh the page. So that starts the 10 seconds. So let's refresh the page, open Storyblok, click save, And now if we open up the application again and refresh the page, we can see we don't get any exclamation marks up here. But after 10 seconds, we should start getting them. So let's refresh one more time. Okay, there they are. So now the 10 seconds passed and it got the new data from Storyblok. So this is something you should do for your application to cache requests that you can for the data that doesn't update that often, but then you can use this to update them after a specific interval of time. But let's move on to the last thing we want to do, which is adding the translations. So now we have these two links up here that are not doing anything yet. So let's change that so we can add the English translations, or we already have the English text, but we want to add the Finnish translations also. So how this works with Storyblok is super easy. So let's open up Storyblok and let's say we want to translate the button text for the navigation. So this one right up here. So in order to do that, I need to mark this field as translatable. And how to do that is to edit the field and check this checkbox for translatable like this. Let's save it. So now this field can be translated. But one thing we still need to do is actually add another language to our space. So right now we only have English in here, but we want to define that, hey, we want to also have Finnish in here. So what I'm going to do now is actually close this story and go to my space settings down here. So I have my space open and go to the settings. And down here we have internationalization. So open that. And over here I can add another language. And I want to add Finnish like this. Let's click add. And we already have the default language here. We can name it as English like this. So we have the default is English and then FI is Finnish. So let's save this. And now we go back to the story, open up the content tab, then the landing page. And over here, let me just take those exclamation marks away. But over here, this was the field that we wanted to translate. So now that we added the new language, we can see up here we have this drop down which has English and Finnish. So now if we choose the Finnish, it should show a toggle over here. But I think if we open the visual editor quickly and then see on the right hand side the navigation right here. Okay, I think this is just a bug right now over here that it doesn't show this toggle always in the full screen mode. But yeah, if you don't see it, you can probably get it displayed by opening the visual view and then opening the component on the right hand side. So now it shows this translate toggle. So what I want to do now is click this. So that means that this field is now translatable and I can add translations for this. So now that I have Finnish select up here, I can add the Finnish translation for this field like this. And now let's click save. Let me minimize this again. And now if we check the draft JSON, so I'm going to open it up from here and note that I have Finnish selected up here. So let's open the draft JSON. I can see that all my other content, for example, the FAQ section, all these fields are still in English. Nothing has changed. But now if we check the navigation section over here, the nav section, it shows the CTA button text in Finnish. So now that we added it as a translatable field and added a translation for it, now it will be displayed in Finnish over here. But how do we define what language we want to use? Well, now if we check the URL, we can see that we have this language parameter over here. And currently it's FI, but let's test if I change it to EN. Like this. Let's see the navigation section. Looks like the text is in English. So by changing this parameter, we can change the language that we want. So in order to fetch the correct data to our application, we somehow need a way to pass in this parameter for the fetch request over here. So before we translate any more fields, let's actually configure our Next.js application to handle the multiple languages and pass in that correct parameter for that fetch request. So next, let's actually open up the Next.js documentation for the internationalization. So over here, I have the Next.js docs open and note that you can choose the pages router or app router up here. So we are using the app router, so we want to use documentation for that. So what they are telling us here is that we need to add this middleware file to our application to handle the different locales. And then we want to move our code inside the app directory to app/lang inside of brackets. So basically the lang will be the local variable, and then we can use the local or the lang variable inside of our page. So basically, if we know this language variable, we can then inside VS Code pass in that for this API request and get the correct language in return. So let's do that. So I'm gonna actually just copy this file from here and open up VS Code and create a new file to my src folder. So make sure you create your middleware file to the src folder instead of the app folder. So I'm gonna click the src, new file, give it a name, middleware.js, like this, and then paste in the code like this. And we need to modify this a little bit. They have this function get locale, so we could detect the user's default locale, but for this example we won't do that. We just want to by default return English. So I'm gonna add return en like this. So what this middleware does is it checks if the URL has some local, and if it does, it does nothing because that's what we want. But if it doesn't have a local, it will then add the default local, so the English in this case, and redirect the user to that URL. So we can save this file. We don't have to do any more modifications, close it. And then the other thing we needed to do was to inside the app directory to move everything inside of a folder called lang that was in brackets. So let's do that. So I'm gonna create a new folder like this, and then I will take everything inside of the app folder and just drag and drop them inside of the lang folder like this. Okay, so now we have created the middleware, moved our components to the lang folder. So now only thing left to do is get the actual lang parameter inside of our page, and we can get it from the params like this. So we are getting the variable named lang from the params, and we need this variable for the fetch request up here. So we want to pass it in for this request. So let's pass that in as a parameter for that get landing page data like this. And now let's modify the function to get that parameter like this. And then we can pass it in as a prop for this URL. So let me do that. So after the token, I'm gonna add a new variable called language, and it should be the lang like this. So if you remember, when we check the API, we get the language by the language parameter up here. So now let's save this and switch to the browser. Looks like there's something happening in here. Let's go to the localhost 3000. Okay, looks like we have something wrong with our middleware because it's just adding the local to the URL all the time. So let's check the middleware after all. Okay, so looks like we still need to modify this array over here. So these are basically the allowed locals that we can use in our application. And those are English and Finnish like this. So I think that caused the problem. So I'm gonna save this and let's open the browser and localhost 3000. Okay, so looks like we get an error. So we have some imports failing because we changed the folder structure. So let's fix those. So this is the hero component. So I'm gonna open that up over here, and it was this import over here, and we don't need it anymore. So I'm just gonna remove it, save it, switch to the browser. Looks like we have still in the testimonials component an import that's failing, and it's the same thing. It's the image that we don't use anymore, so we can just get rid of it. Let's save it, switch to the browser, and now looks like everything is working. So the page is looking like it should, but now if I click the finish button, nothing happens yet because we still need to configure this button to tell Next.js that, hey, we want to use finish. So let's switch to VS Code, and I'm gonna open the nav bar where that button is. And over here, we are actually telling the local is fi or ni, but for this case, we can get rid of these and just add it to the href. So since we are using the local in the URL directly, we can just add them over here as href. So now if we save this and switch to the browser, and let's just refresh the page. And now if I click the finish button, looks like it translates the button up here. Nothing else yet because we haven't added translations for them, but looks like it's working. So now if I click the in English again, it changes the text over there. So looks like the translations are working. And if you check the URL, it is now en, and if I click the in Finnish, it changes to fi. So that's how we are telling Next.js that, hey, we want to use Finnish or English translations. So now that we have the translation logic working, let's add some more translations. So now we just added it for the navbar, but let's add it for the other sections too. So I'm gonna open the landing page and let's open the hero section and mark the title as translatable. So edit it, translatable, and save. Then the description, do the same thing. And for the CTA button text also, let's translate that like this. And now we can add translations for them, but looks like we have the bug happening again, so it doesn't show the toggle here. So let's just open the visual editor and then the hero section. And now we have the toggles over here. So I'm gonna translate all these fields and add the translations for these like this. So let's click save. So now all of the fields are translated and let's just see if it works. So now I have my application. It's in English. Let's refresh the page and click the finish. And what do you know? It translates the text, the title, and the button. So it's that easy to add the translations in Storyblok to your content after you have configured your application to use multiple languages. So let's add translations for the rest of the sections too. So I'm going to open the landing page and the services section. And here we want to translate the title. Let's click that. Let's close this one. And then for the service cards, we want to translate also the title, then we want to translate the subtitle, description, and the price, like this. Let's save it. And now if we open up the services again, and I'm going to open up the service card, let's click the toggle for all of these fields. So we want to translate them. And let me input the translations like this. Let's save it and go back to the services. So now the first card is translated and we also want to translate the title. So let me do that like this and let's click save. And I'm just gonna translate the rest of the cards also. So I'm gonna mark in the card the title and actually the description to translatable because the subtitle and price in this case don't need to be translated. So I'm just gonna add the translations for this like this. Let's save it, go to the next card, click the same fields to be translated and add the translations like this. Let's save it, go back and translate the last card too. So the title and description and let's add the translations like this. Okay, let's save it, go back to the services and the landing page and let's just see that everything is working. So I'm gonna open up my application. Let's refresh the page. We have the finish on. So now we have the services section also translated in here. That's great. So next we have the testimonials section. So let's add the translations for that. So I'm going to open it up, mark this field as translatable and then translate it like this. And let's open up the testimonial cards and the name field. Let's click that as translatable too. And then the comment also, let's translate that and then add the translations. But actually, now that I look at it, we don't want to translate the name, to be honest. So let's take that away like so. So we only want to translate the comment. So for this card, let's translate that like this. Let's save it, go back to the testimonials and translate the next card. So the comment for that like this, save it, click the testimonials again, translate the next card like this, save it, go back to the testimonials and let's translate the last card to like this. Let's save it. We can go back to the landing page and let's see the application. So if we refresh the page, we can see the testimonials are also translated. Great. Next, the contact section. So in Storyblok, let's open the contact section and also mark the title as translatable and the description, save it, and then also the location like this. So we don't want to translate the email nor the phone number. Okay, so let's translate all of these fields like this and click save. Now, if we check the application, refresh the page, we get the translated content in the contact section. Next, the FAQs. So let's open up the FAQ section. And I think I don't want to translate this title, but for the cards, I want to translate the question and also the answer over here like this. Good, they are marked as translatable. Now I have the first card open over here, so let's translate that like this. Let's click save and open up the next card and translate that too like this. Save it, open up the next card, translate that, save it, and open up the last card and add the translations for that too like this. Let's save it, and now let's see the application, refresh the page, and the FAQs are also translated. Great. And for the footer, I don't think I want to translate that, so I think that's all of the fields that we want to translate. So again, you can translate the fields inside of here by changing the language up here. So if you choose English, you can change the English content over here. And if you select another language, you can change the translation for that. So now our website should be fully functioning and ready to go. So just to recap, we are using Next.js and Tailwind CSS to build and style this, and all of our data is in Storyblok, which is a headless CMS. And thanks to Storyblok, we can modify the content of our website easily, and you can even have another person editing your content that knows nothing about Next.js or how to code. So that's super handy. And our website also supports multiple languages. So in this case, we have English and Finnish, and you can easily change between those. And if you want to modify or add translations, you can do it easily inside of Storyblok. I really hope that you found this video at least somewhat helpful and maybe learned something new from it. And if you did, please let me know by leaving a comment down below and hitting the like and subscribe button. I'll see you in the next video.